Hello everybody, this is another video on openings, and the sample game is a game I had with Joachim Snuverink. I hope this is how you pronounce it. And the opening we'll be looking at is the Alekhine 4 pawns attack. Very, very sharp opening. And it starts with e4, and the feature of the Alekhine or Alekhine is knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, d6. So here's the sort of basic starting position of the Alekhine. And the 4 pawns attack is, well, rather aptly named after c4, knight b6, f4. And there are several ways of playing this as black. What white wants to do is consolidate the centre, keep the pawns from dropping off, and keep them nice and solid and in a good structure. And then later you could use them as a battering ram against black's position. And black is quite cramped at the start of this opening. So yeah, that's what white wants to do. What black wants to do is to, well, find a way of getting out the pieces, but also generally to fix white's pawn structure so it can't advance, and then to try and chip away at it, and to, instead of occupying the centre, attack the centre, and try and force either a bad pawn structure or the win of a pawn or some other kind of tactical or positional advantage. So what I play is g6 to allow my dark squared bishop out. Bishop e3 was now played, which is not a bad move, it's perfectly okay. And now what I want to do is fix the pawns. So I take, and unless white wants to trade queens and leave the king in the centre, he needs to take with the f-pawn, which he did. And now I develop with bishop g7. So already the pawns are stuck for the moment. Not to say forever, but the pawn on e5 clearly can't advance. The pawn on d4 can't advance because e5 will be attacked. And the pawn on c4, if that does advance, I can play knight d5 and blockade the backward pawn on d4. So to go back to what I said in a previous video, if you're going to play this opening, or any opening really, you need to know some of the ideas, and you need to know what the basic plan is at the beginning. And here, there are two good moves. One is knight c3, so the pawns and bishop are on the dark squares on e3, d4, e5, so the knight is guarding the light squares here. Not a bad move. I wouldn't play it, but I think it's perfectly okay. And the move that is generally considered to be best, I think, is knight f3, just because black is trying to attack and put pressure on the dark squares, partly with the bishop and also on the d4 pawn, which you'll see in a moment. So knight f3 just guards and consolidates on those dark squares, and the pin, which black may do on g4, might not be that effective after either bishop e2 or even knight b d2, although I would prefer bishop e2. But here, the key feature is control of the 4 central squares, and white's next move, bishop e2, was not really addressing that. So I must just point out briefly that Joachim Snuverink is not a bad player at all. He's not weak or inexperienced. He's rated over 220 ECF, or he was anyway at the time the game was played, and I think he still is. And I think his FIDE was close to 2400 at the time. So very good, very strong player, but this just shows that anyone can make an error. especially in the opening if they don't know the idea. So I then tried to break up white's pawn structure with the thematic c5. So again, I'm trying to chip away at white's pawn center, and if d5 was played, I could just take on e5. This is partly why knight f3 is a stronger move, because it would be guarding the e5 pawn. And if knight f3 now, I can take pawns on d4 and leave white with a shattered pawn structure. The pawn on e5 is isolated, and his strong pawn center has evaporated. So the move he chose was d takes. He's going for material here. And rather, this is the one blight on the game, for me at least. I offered him a draw after queen takes d1. I was very, very tired, and I just wanted a quick result. And he was rated more than 30 points above me, so I'd have been happy with a draw. But fortunately for this game, and for my pride, he didn't take it. He didn't take the draw. I mean, he took the queen with the king. If he takes with the bishop, knight takes c4 is very strong. And here, could you see the move I play now? Yeah, I don't really care about the knight being attacked. I just play bishop takes e5. And this is why knight c3 would have been stronger, because instead of bishop e2, because I'm now threatening bishop takes b2. And that would trap his rook. So if he takes my knight, he could well lose a rook. And if he plays knight c3, I could take his knight, and that would leave him with tripled isolated pawns, which is never a good thing. Or I could even just move my knight back to d7, and he's got doubled pawns. So I've got a very good position here, and just to get this opening all the way to the end, this is a major sideline of the Alekhine, but it's still fairly useful as a demonstration of sort of what not to do and to calculate this fully. He took on b6, and I took on b2. And now he played knight c3. And this leaves me with a choice. I can either take the rook or the knight. Which would you do if you were black in this position? Well, if you take the rook going for material, knight b5 is quite unpleasant, and I didn't really like this for black. Knight c7 is the main threat. But even if I play bishop e5, knight f3, and that would leave me with a lot of problems. And knight a6 instead, in this position here, might not be so good anyway, due to perhaps just pawn takes pawn. And I just feel that my pieces aren't really working that well together, and white should have enough, or he should have quite a bit for the exchange with that pawn on a7. So I actually took the knight. He then had to move the rook, and I put the bishop back to f6. So still on a fairly central, still kind of in the center and on the long diagonal. White then took the pawn on a7, and I play knight c6. So one of the major themes of the Alekhine is piece placement. It's using your pieces to attack the center. And even though this isn't a mainline Alekhine or anything like it, the way that I continue playing is quite thematic. I don't just throw pawns up or try and go for the pawn after knight f3. I don't just grab the pawn. I keep developing, which is needed in this kind of opening. That pawn is not going anywhere. There's no other way to protect it that I can really see, so I can pick it off at my leisure. I don't need to immediately go for it. So bishop f5 was played, and again, if you've seen my other videos on my personal games, you'll know I like creating threats. So, which is generally a good idea. It's not just a crazy thing I do. What's the threat behind bishop f5? Yeah, the threat is if we give white a non-move like rook g1, for example, I can play bishop b2, and I've now won the exchange because the rook can't move anywhere without being taken. So that didn't happen. He played king e1 to give the rook d1. I still don't take the pawn, I castle. And here we reach the end of this opening, really. I've got very good prospects. I've got, admittedly, not anything in terms of material, but when I capture the pawn, I'll be a pawn up. White's pawns are not very good on a2 and c4. You could argue my b7 pawn is isolated, but I don't think it's going to be easy for white to really attack. And I'll have the open a file to go after his a pawn. His king is stuck in the center, which generally when the queens have come off, sometimes it isn't that big a factor. But here, there's so many pieces on the board that, and the two rooks, of course, that I can exploit this in the future. So yeah, I'll end the video here, and I might show the game in its entirety in my personal games playlist at some future point. But just to quickly overview, in the Alekhine, what you want to do is get your pieces out, and it's usually to attack white's center. You let white occupy the center with pawns, and you then either fianchetto or pin white's pieces or something else, and you try and undermine white's center. So you play against the center rather than occupying it yourself. So I hope you like this video. Comment, subscribe, leave any questions, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.